Okay, everyone. So thank you very much for coming to this open day. It's wonderful to see so many people here. So I'm the program director of the NERC DTP in environmental research. You've just heard from Victoria, who's the program manager, and it does, well, to be honest, most of the heavy lifting in the DTP. You've probably already found us on social media, but obviously our website. We're also on Twitter, or as it's now known, X. We're kind of waiting really to see how that plays out over the coming months, but we're still using it. Instagram, we're also on, and we're also on YouTube. And although we have a handle on YouTube, it's easier to just search for DTP in Environmental Research Oxford, and you will find us. We're funded primarily by the Natural Research Council, and we're part of a doctoral training centre, and I'll tell you more about what these various acronyms mean later on in the presentation. So I want to start with our ambitions, if you like, our mission statement. And primarily what we're aiming to do is to provide a supportive, and I use that word intentionally, research environment to train the next generation of researchers. And that's across the full breadth of NERC, Natural Environment Research Council's remit in environmental research. So it means we go all the way from mathematics and physics of climate to geochemistry, to zoology, archaeology, etc. It's an incredibly diverse pool of students with an incredibly diverse pool of skills. We also have a second ambition, and that's to admit talented students from a diverse range of backgrounds. And that means both in backgrounds in terms of socioeconomic, cultural backgrounds, but also, as I mentioned previously, from different subjects with different skills. Because we need people from diverse backgrounds to enable them to work creatively and advance knowledge and understanding, and find solutions to environmental challenges, which are some of the greatest challenges that we face in the 21st century. So Victoria's already mentioned that I think Victoria said 16 fully funded studentships. We have 16 students funded by NERC. We typically get a few additional students funded through scholarships. So next year is probably slightly under 20, maybe 18 or 19. 4-year studentships leading to a DPhil. One thing you will discover about Oxford, which drives everybody mad, is Oxford likes to create new words or acronyms for everything. Even the River Thames has a new name when it passes through Oxford. And so a PhD is called a DPhil here. I usually just call it a PhD, and I probably will throughout this talk, but it's called a DPhil in Oxford. Victoria's already mentioned that the funding includes fees, stipends, and a research budget. We do not admit students without covering the fees, the stipend, and the research budget. So if you are admitted, you will be fully funded. And not all programs do this, but we give our students full access to that research budget. It's £8,000 over the 4 years of the program. You manage it. There are some rules about what you can do with the money. But it's one of the skills you have to develop is to manage that budget. And that will cover things like your research expenses, your conference travel. If you're in the physical sciences, a computer. So a desktop computer would be covered under overheads from the department. But if you are doing serious research computing, you would want probably a beefier computer or laptop, and that would be included. We do recognize that some projects have higher research expenses, costs. And if you're doing a lot of field work or experimental work, then there is an opportunity to apply for an additional amount of money during it's not a huge amount, but some additional money during the PhD. And in fact, many of our students are very resourceful and manage to leverage other source pots of funding as they go along too, either from departments, external organizations, and colleges indeed are a great source of funding. Our studentships are open to all qualified candidates, so that means you don't have to be a UK resident or national. You can apply as an international student. As Victoria said, there is a cap of 30% of the NERC funding that we can spend on international students, although we could try to use scholarships to increase that number where we can. The research project, so one important distinction between a doctoral training partnership and a so-called CDT, a Center for Doctoral Training, is a DTP is focused on discovery science. So it means you can work on absolutely any project relevant to any NERC science area, provided we have the resources to provide the necessary supervision. So these are open-ended fundamental research projects. They can be very blue skies based on fundamentals. They can be disciplinary. So it's a bit of a myth that you have to be working on an interdisciplinary project in a DTP. That's not true. But equally, we encourage interdisciplinary working too. So here are the host departments. I'm impressed that Victoria managed to remember all 8. I certainly wouldn't, so I write them down on my slide to help me. This is not I think quite a complete list, but our external partners. And you can see we have an awful lot of external partners, some of which support CASE awards. Now, CASE is an acronym that is so old that very few people can remember what it stands for. I did work it out recently and I've forgotten again. But it basically means that the partner puts in a small amount of additional funding, essentially research expenses, and then you have an external collaborator. And if you're interested in doing this, again, we very much encourage it. I think we have one CASE project advertised on our website already, which certainly would be prioritized in this next recruitment round. I want to stress that if your preferred partner that you really want to work with doesn't appear on this list, that's fine. We can partner projects with other people, other organizations too, as indeed we can with other universities. So if you want to collaborate with another university, a particular supervisor, that's also fine. We do require the primary supervisor to be a full-time academic in Oxford. But I have co-supervised a couple of projects with other universities on the DTP. Really importantly, our program is student-led. So we encourage students to take responsibility for formulating and writing their research proposal from the outset in collaboration with supervisors and project partners. So we have the research streams, as Victoria mentioned, so biodiversity, ecology and evolutionary processes, dynamic earth, surface processes and natural hazards, and the physical climate system. So BEEP, as we know them, PCS, and we've never managed to work out how to say the DESPN Earth one, so I just call it Earth Sciences. But we do also have cross-stream themes, and I would just say a little more about those. So this is not a comprehensive list, but BEEP covers topics such as biodiversity, conservation ecosystems, evolution, origins of life organism, macronutrient cycling, etc. All of the programs actually cover global change. So the key departments are listed here, but you may well find that you end up working on a project that involves another department too, and that's fine. I should have added we can involve departments outside the DTP too, but we'd expect the primary supervisor to be based in one of the 8 DTP departments. The deep dynamic Earth stream, so the sort of things you might guess: chronology, continental tectonics, so geochemistry, geodynamics, Earth surface processes, volcanology, for example, and natural hazards too. So the key departments there would be earth sciences, physics, geography, maths, engineering, and then physical climate system, which is the stream I'm based in. So this is really focused on how the climate system works and how it's worked in the past, what's going to happen in the future, and finding solutions to climate change. So atmospheres, oceans, cryosphere, etc. And the key departments would be physics, geography, earth sciences, maths, and engineering. But we do also have cross-stream themes, and quite a number of our students, each year ask the question, well, what if I'm not sure which theme I fit into best, which way should I go? And well, my advice actually would be, initially at least, I would choose the theme where you think you will interview best. So if you have more of an earth science background, I would go to the dynamic earth theme initially. If you have more of a physics background, I go to physical climate, etc. But don't feel you will then be buttonholed into that theme. You can cross theme actually when you join, and occasionally that happens. So there are some topics that really are cross theme from the outset, and geoengineering would be a great example. Sensors, development, citizen science. And there's one in particular here. I've circled two boxes: artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science. And this year in particular, we need to discuss these because I will mention at the end, we've just had a new CDT, a Centre for Doctoral Training, funded, called Intelligent Earth. They have an open day tomorrow. And I have a slide on this at the end. And you might be wondering, well, should I apply to the DTP or to the Intelligent Earth CDT? The answer may well be both, and you can do that in your application. You can apply to more than one program at the same time. But I think the rule of thumb to apply is that if you're going to be using artificial intelligence or data science as a black box, so you're not really, getting into the nuts and bolts of the AI itself, then you probably belong in the DTP. Whereas if you want to develop AI or data science tools, then you probably belong better in Intelligent Earth. That's the advice I've been given, and I think it's good advice. So our students do amazing things. These are just 3 examples, pretty random examples, to be honest, just to give you an idea of the breadth, really, of the work students have done. But, it's really impressive with global impact. So April Burt has worked on plastic pollution in the Seychelles. We had another student, Noam, who graduated just this summer, who was similarly looking at the effects of plastic pollution in the same region. And this is a great example, actually, this work of how to avoid parachute science by actually trying to develop some work with the local researchers in the Seychelles. Milan Clover has actually, his main part of his PhD was on low precision computing to try and reduce the cost of running climate models, or equivalently how to get higher resolution out of a climate model for the same computational cost. But Milan is also passionate about decarbonizing the world in general, and wrote quite an influential paper in Nature on the carbon footprint of big international science conferences, and which has had a huge impact. So that wasn't even part of his PhD thesis, but was very impressive. And then Lauren Rudd also wrote a very nice paper on the side on overcoming racism in conservation science and practice. So it just gives you an idea of the breadth of some of the projects our students get involved with. Victoria's already mentioned the cohort, but I think it's nice to have some pictures as well. I can't really overstate the importance of the cohort. If you join the DTP, the very first thing you will do on arriving in Oxford, once you've got your accommodation, moved your stuff in, is you will spend 3 days up at Whiteham Woods. So this is a beautiful field site just outside Oxford. You can see it from the centre, actually, if you're on the right side of the built-up area. Although you have to take a slight detour to get there. So we don't stay overnight, but the students meet each morning up at Whiteham in this wonderful Swiss chalet, bizarrely, that's on top of the hill at Whiteham. And we have various activities that's really aimed at building the cohort. And the very first thing we do actually is to have the students all talk to each other to try and break down the barriers, share their something about their previous experience and also their anxieties about doing a PhD. Because we really want to sort of break down this idea of Oxford being a stuffy place. The DTP is anything but. You know, we're normal people who have come from normal backgrounds often. You know, I came from a comprehensive school and both of my parents left school at the age of 16. So I get the issues, I get the anxieties. I think everyone is just raves about this field trip and it builds a really close cohort. And they also rave about the pizzas and they're all queuing up to volunteer to come and help out on the pizza day. The training program, Victoria's covered loads of this already, so I don't really need to say a huge amount. It's equivalent to 6 months throughout the 4 years of the program. When I became the program director a year and a half ago, I thought it was quite important to make a change, which is that we no longer regard the vast majority of the courses, not quite all, but the vast majority as mandatory. So if you already have expertise in the area that corresponds to one of the default sort of training courses, there is no point you sitting through this again. We treat you as adults. So we have a default training program, but one of the first things we do in the first week is I ask you to think about whether that's the best training program. And if you would like to do something else instead, and you have a good reason, then we will help you to do that. Most of the students do the default, but we have a handful each year now who follow a slightly different program. And it's made a world of difference actually because it means, again, it's now the students are leading in choosing their training program. We treat you as adults, in other words, but in return, we ask you to take the training seriously. And the feedback is very, very good. Victoria has made some wonderful videos that are either up on the website or will go up on the website shortly that will tell you something about those training programs, including one that I was presenting last week. I think that will go up soon. So the core training is really focused on core skills. So things like software engineering or Python, introduction to programming in the first 3 weeks, the Earth system. I'm currently teaching a numerical modeling course, which the physical climate students tend to take. Those on the biological side tend to take a statistics course, but we have some, as I said, other students doing different things. And then we have the soft skills training. I'm going to say a little more about Grand Challenges in a moment because it's a great program. And then specialist training that occurs really, you know, then in the second and third term, but really should be throughout your PhD. I'm trying to encourage students to think about continuing the training throughout the 4 years. So it is a flexible and it can be adapted to your experience and your needs. Right, the Doctoral Training Centre, this causes so much confusion. So let me have a slide to explain what the DTC, as it's known, is. So originally this was a program like a DTP, but that was many, many years ago. But what it is now is it's an umbrella of doctoral training programs. It's based in this building, a rather nice Victorian building next to this concrete monstrosity next door. Some people think it's a 1960s brutalist masterpiece, but I think it's a horrible physics building. But we have these nice Victorian villas here. Inside has been completely refurbished, and this building here houses the Doctoral Training Centre. And it's where most of the training in the first 6 months takes place. It's where Victoria has an office, a desk somewhere in here. And there are currently, or at least there are currently 5 programs within the DTC. So they're interdisciplinary bioscience, DTP. There's our DTP in environmental research. The sustainable approaches to biomedical science and responsible and reproducible research. So SABs are 3, and chemistry in cells. So that's about new technologies to probe complex biology and medicine. And the new program is Intelligent Earth, funded just a couple or 2 or 3 weeks ago, but already starting to recruit, and with an open day tomorrow. which is the closest to our program, although some of you on the biological side may be interested in looking at the bioscience DTP2. So I have slides on these two at the end. So the DTC is, as Victoria said, is like a sort of department almost in Oxford, but it also houses these various programs. But by working together, we can help each other out. If, for example, someone is sick, it just gives us some redundancy. And also we pull some of the training courses where the more generic skills and share good practice, frankly. The events that we run, I think, one of the highlights for me is the Grand Challenge seminars, and these are just 3 of the seminars from last year. So climate crisis, bridging the gap between science and policy, bridging the divide between oceans and society, and global shortages in a changing climate. So I was asked by the student organizers to chair the oceans one here. The students do the vast majority of the work here. So we this year have found the students the venue and accommodation for the speakers, but otherwise the students do all of the work, and that means they've already actually for this year chosen their topics. We have a meeting on Friday to move for the next stage and moving forward with those. The students they've all formed now into little groups and are choosing how they want to organize their sessions, who they want to invite as panelists or speakers. They have to organize the events that go around this, so the dinner, the drinks reception, the format of the session itself. And it's a great chance actually to think big, and develop links with some pretty powerful people. So for example, James Honeybourne was the executive producer of Blue Planet 2, who I'd never met. And, it was a real pleasure to meet him at that session. And I know the students got an awful lot out of meeting these various speakers. Right, after Easter, you will transfer to a department. So in the summer term of year 1, we call it Trinity term in Oxford, but it's summer term for practical purposes. So we admit to a program, not the department. You write a short research proposal, which will be 2 pages, plus a research budget. This is not meant to be a daunting process. It's not like some American Ivy League programs where, this is a major issue of stress. It's very light touch, but it's basically all about making sure students take ownership of their project from the outset. We then have a 30-minute meeting with 2 academics, so typically a management committee member and 1 other, where you will present and discuss your proposal. And again, it's not really meant to be a daunting thing. It's really just to make sure everything is well posed, and if necessary, make some suggestions of how you might perhaps sharpen the initial questions up, or check that your budget is sensible, and so forth. We require all of our students to have at least two supervisors. You can have more. I wouldn't have too many because you want to know who's in charge. The primary supervisor must be based in Oxford, but the second supervisor can be outside if you need, provided that your department allows that. I know Earth Sciences require 2 within Oxford. So you may find there are department rules that come into play at that point. You actually obtain your DPhil from the department in which you end up being registered, not from the DTC. So if you go to physics, for example, atmospheric physics, you get a DPhil in atmospheric physics rather than in environmental research. Most people don't care about that, but if you care about it, then that's good to know. I get asked all the time, is it possible to change supervisor? Yes, that happens. That happens actually. Let's say it's not the norm, but it's certainly not rare. We have people every year who change the supervisor they intend to work with. Some come in having no idea who they want to work with, and we encourage that too. And you can also change department after joining the DTP. That does happen. Again, well, that's rarer, but it does happen occasionally. There are an awful lot of research resources around Oxford. There are more seminars than you could ever go to. You could spend every day of the week going to a seminar if you wanted to, so you need to manage this. But just to give you an idea of the resources available, to me, this is one of the big attractions of Oxford. So we have the Oxford Martin School, for example, which is is trying to address 21st century multidisciplinary challenges, have some really impressive high-profile speakers. We have the One Network, so it's the Oxford Networks for the Environment. It's a network of networks, because there is a climate network, a biodiversity network, an energy network, a food network, water network. The climate network has, I think, from memory, about 150 people or so. So faculty, researchers, students, and meets once a term, but also organizes an annual seminar. So although we're based in disciplinary departments, there's an awful lot going on in Oxford to try and draw things together at the multidisciplinary level. There are opportunities to develop spin-outs, amazing libraries, and the colleges play a big role as well. They often have initiatives in the environment or climate. There's the Museum of Natural History. I can't remember now what Oxford Foundry is. That's another for developing spin-outs, and Oxford Sparks for trying to communicate the science more broadly. When you apply to Oxford, Victoria I'm sure will mention this, you have to apply to a college. We do sometimes move students in order to juggle the funding around. We try and use our scholarships as best we can to maximize the number of students. So you might be asked to change college, but if you have your heart set on a particular college, there's no harm in asking for that. I mean, one of the choices you need to make is, do I go for an older college or a newer college? And it's kind of up to you, really. When I was a student, I would have gone for a newer college. I don't know, I might go for an older college now just because I've discovered they have more funding, to be frank. But the newer colleges tend to be a bit more relaxed in general. Talk to current students, if you want to get a feel for what a place is like. But you, as a graduate student, you probably won't spend as much time in college as you would as an undergraduate, but still it will be a part of your time in Oxford. How to apply? Well, we have a session on this year. We've already mentioned the deadline. You can apply to more than one program. We will have a briefing session if you're shortlisted sometime in February. Equality, diversity, and inclusion. So this is really important to us. Our DTP students are open to all candidates who will achieve or have achieved a final degree of a 2-1 or higher in a relevant discipline. We do recognize people come from very diverse backgrounds. We recognize that that people have faced different barriers in the past. I think if you have encountered difficulties and that's affected your performance at some point, what I would say is make sure that comes across in your statement of purpose of how you've overcome those barriers. The trajectory is at least as important as your academic record, and someone who's got to where they've got to through really fighting against adversity, that will impress the people shortlisting and interviewing. First, other people have done very well, but have really had an easy ride through. So we want to hear the story, so try and tell us why it is you think you will make a good PhD student. And we're trying as much as we can to admit based on potential rather than just what you've achieved so far. We do aim to prioritize 2 to 3 students for candidates who meet one of the following criteria. So first generation to go to university, been in care for 3 months, or come from a disadvantaged neighborhood, etc. I shouldn't say that word, sorry, that had faced challenges, shall we say. But it is actually quite hard to do this because of the various rules that we face, but we do an awful lot during the recruitment process to try and level the playing field as far as we can. One thing we have done this year, and it's relevant to some of the questions that have come up, is we have removed the requirement to upload a 500-word research project. That is not part of the process. And the primary reason we did that is that we think it was a major source of bias. So it really helps students who, in particular, were already in Oxford and might have known their potential supervisor. So we've removed it. basically, because you shouldn't need to know what project you're going to work on to be admitted to the DTP. One of the whole ideas of the DTP is it's student-led. So it's absolutely fine to come in with no project in mind. You know, obviously we'd like to know what sort of areas you want to work in, because your background is very relevant there. Do you have the core skills needed to look at it for that area of science? And in fact, just yesterday, we were discussing some draft guidelines that we're circulating panels to make clear what these criteria are. There are Black Academic Future Scholarships available across the university. So we have access to those through the DTC, so the broader umbrella. So all of these programs in collaboration with Lineker. And if you're eligible for one of those, we will probably try to match you up with that scheme. The application process is anonymized. Victoria will say a lot about this with the standard CV template. So, all I really want to stress is give us a narrative of the challenges you've overcome. Don't worry about scholarship competitions. We will try and find scholarships that we can match you with because it helps us to admit more students. But if you are aware of scholarships, then of course do let us know. Our students do amazing things, and one of the highlights of the last couple of months is that well, a couple of our students who are currently writing up their PhD theses in earth sciences have developed a climate musical, Chrissy and the Squiddle Witch, which they took to the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh last summer. And we had an opportunity over the summer to apply for £50,000 of funding to increase the stream of people from less advantaged backgrounds coming into environmental research. And NERC has finally realized that it's not just about promoting the programs to undergraduates, but you've got to get these students doing science in the first place. And so we joined the dots and thought, well, you know, the two students, Roberta and Matthew, want to go on a UK tour with their climate musical. And so what we've done is propose that they'll take it around the country to some less advantaged schools, shall we say, and combine this with outreach activities, and which is essentially what they were doing at the Fringe anyway. And one of the questions was about engaging with other DTPs, and actually this is a great example where they engage with local DTPs for the outreach to try and reduce the carbon footprint of the initiative too. So again, it's just one example of what's going on. I should mention the other two programs that might be of particular interest. So the Interdisciplinary Bioscience DTP. So you can read the areas here. We'll make these slides available. Some of our projects could fit as equally within the Bioscience DTP as they could within the NERC DTP. And if that's the case, you probably want to apply to both. And although there are a lot of applicants for our BEEP stream, I would say there's also a lot of opportunities, different programs you can apply to. So, you know, so maybe the odds aren't quite as, it's not quite as difficult as it first seems just from the sheer numbers. And then the newcomer on the block is Intelligent Earth. So this is for doctoral training in artificial intelligence for the environment. It's a 4-year program just like ours, with 2 entry streams for numerate environmental science backgrounds and for AI, machine learning, math, physics backgrounds. So you can come from either of those two sides. You can see that the themes basically map almost perfectly onto what we're doing in the DTP. But the key difference here is you will be jointly supervised by an academic working in the environmental sciences and an academic working in AI. So for example, in computer science or mathematics. And you will also have a non-academic advisor from one of the partners, and they have a lot of partners signed up here. So some projects will fit naturally within this, some will fit better within our DTP, some may be ambiguous, and you may want to apply to both programs they have 20 students a year. So, it's worth applying, I'd say, to both, if that's relevant to you. Right, I was cutting and pasting questions, and I wanted to run through some of these. What makes a good candidate for a DTP? Essentially, someone we think has the potential to turn into an outstanding researcher. And it doesn't necessarily mean someone who's got top academic grades the whole way through. We're just looking for something that, a spark that makes you, that says to us, you've got potential to be an amazing research scientist. And as I said, your statement of purpose is really your opportunity to articulate that. Is the DTC the only department to take part in the admissions process? Do departments have a say? Victoria answered this. So the DTP is the admitting body. The departments have people sitting on the interview panel, but it's the admissions are done entirely by the DTP. We do sometimes cross-refer candidates to departments and vice versa, but we make our decisions within the DTP. The courses I think I've answered, or Victoria's answered. Doesn't make any difference when you apply, as long as you're in time for the deadline. Can you do short internships or placements at other universities during the course? Yes, and indeed outside academia too. So you can do policy placements, industrial placements. What PhD programs stand a higher chance of getting into the DTP scholarship? We are the program that admits, so there is no other program here that you're applying to. You're applying to the DTP. Do you need to contact potential supervisors before applying? Victoria's already said it's a good idea, to be honest, especially if you get to interview. But it's not essential, but I would recommend it. I've already found a supervisor written a proposal. We have taken out the proposal this year. We really want to feel that was creating an unfair playing field for those who had better access to potential supervisors. So we've taken it out. So you don't need to provide that. Of course, you could mention it in your statement of purpose, but we're going to make clear to panels that is not expected and they should not be scoring candidates higher simply because they've got an idea of the project they want to work on. Do you apply through the project supervisor? No, you apply to the DTP. You can apply to the department too if they have additional funding. It might make sense, but for the DTP, you apply to us, not the supervisor. We actually insist that supervisors play no role in the recruitment on the DTP. So if someone is listed as a potential supervisor and they won't be asked to assess your application beyond just giving a yes or no answer, would they be willing to supervise you in principle? Because we obviously don't want to admit students where the supervisor wouldn't want to supervise. And if they're on the panel, they'll be asked to leave the room during your interview. So we take that seriously. We don't allow supervisors to play games with the admissions process. You don't need to submit a research proposal. How would I describe DTP students in general compared to traditional students? That's hard. I mean, often they're very similar, actually. But I would say our DTP students, and I'm not just being biased here, I think they tend to be happier because they love the cohort. So many of those outside the DTP, I think, are a little envious of the cohort aspect and the closeness of the students and the skills, the broader skills training they get. The students tell us when they graduate really sets them up, I think, to do amazing things outside academia or within academia. The real world is complicated, and these broader skills are so valuable. Are the research streams split evenly? Essentially, yes, give or take one or two. So it depends on, exactly who's on the list and how many students each department is likely to end up with. But essentially, yes. Rate of acceptance, we've already discussed. I do want to stress, though, you should be applying to multiple programs, not just Oxford. And I think a much higher percentage of students who apply get a DTP place somewhere. So do bear that in mind. And also it's good practice to apply elsewhere. So, don't just look at us. There are many good programs out there. Peer review publications required. I wasn't sure what this question meant. And at first, actually, I thought it meant something else. So I'm going to answer it two ways. Definitely not to apply. It's a myth that you must have multiple papers to apply. We admit students, plenty of students who don't have publications. It's not going to harm you if you have it, but equally, we recognize that many people don't have that opportunity. I at first thought you were asking, do you need peer review publications to get a PhD? And the answer to that is actually it depends on the department. Some departments like geography do insist on that actually, that you publish a certain number of papers. In physics, we've never insisted on that. So it's something to think about when transferring to department, perhaps. Is there a minimum GPA? No. Again, just give us the narrative. I mean, obviously academic back record counts, but we also want you to explain the context. And if there's a marked improvement, for example, in your scores, then that would certainly do you no harm. Are there connections with other DTPs around the UK? Yes, we meet every, is it 6 months or a year? I can't remember now. We just had a joint meeting, pooling a lot of expertise, telling NERC what we think they should be doing as well. You can, if in principle, you can join courses in other DTPs too. Victoria is always emailing opportunities for courses with other DTPs around to the students. I'm applying for an advertised project with specific supervisor. No, you apply to the DTP. You might have in mind that you want to work on that. If you're not sure which stream to apply to, I answered this earlier, go for the one where you feel you would be most comfortable interviewing, it'd be my advice. But you could ask the supervisor too, frankly. Bachelor's is first class and your master's just a pass. Would it affect your chances? I think you need to tell us why, to be frank. If there's a good reason, then it may well not. But tell us, give us the narrative and explain why you think you should be accepted. We've talked about the topic already. You don't need to know which topic. And are DTP students generally younger or less experienced than traditional DPhil students? No. I'd say broadly very similar. Actually, I've not noticed a difference. We have some mature students. The vast majority are people who have come out of an undergraduate degree. Some have had a little bit of work experience or a gap year. Like any other program, we take a diverse range of students. Okay, I'll stop. I've been talking for too long. I hope that was helpful. I'm going to stop share and look at the Q&A and see if there's any questions.
So while you were giving your presentation, David, I've been sort of going through the Q&A and I've been typing in quite a lot of answers to the questions.
Okay, cool.
So so attendees will see that in the Q&A there's a kind of there are 3 tabs. One says open 26, and those are the ones I haven't yet answered. And then there's an answered tab, which is 45. And then there's dismissed. I haven't dismissed anybody's questions.
Okay.
So
I answered one earlier and I couldn't work out why my answer didn't appear, and it's it gone into a new tab.
It's taken me about a year to get my head around this whole
okay.
But yeah, so I'll leave this tab up. And I guess, well, hopefully, yeah, we're going to keep the meeting running throughout the day. We'll pause the recordings in between, when there are breaks, we'll pause the recordings, and then hopefully I'll be reminded.
We'll capture the questions, I assume.
Yeah, and then as the day progresses, I will type in more and more answers, and then hopefully save that document.
Yeah. Can I run through some of them right now?
Sure. Yeah.
Is there an age limit? No. Reviewers needed. It's helpful to us if you can identify reviewers. Also, the other reason to do that is if it's a bit ambiguous what you'd work on, it's really helpful to tell us, potential reviewers, just so we get the right subject area, essentially. But it's not necessary if you're really unsure, but Victoria will be grateful if you suggest reviewers. Is it different from Inspire DTP than our DTP? Well, we're both DTPs funded by NERC. There are several of these around the country. I forget how many. There will be differences, but look at them all. to be honest. You know, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Inspire is actually is a very impressive DTP, and Victoria just shared some good practice from Inspire with me this week or last week to ask if we should be basically embracing what they're doing in one aspect.
They have a great like how to apply page with lots of support for applicants. I really would recommend going and looking at them. And I've just clicked one student has asked a question which I've just accidentally clicked that I want to answer the question live instead of typing it in, and I don't know how to undo that. So if I can answer that question live. So the question was, when are interviews held, and are the dates flexible if a student is away in the field then? So that's quite topical. They are on the 19th and 20th of February next year. If there are exceptional circumstances, we may be able to interview early. But again, you would need to contact us first and explain your situation, and we will try and pull out the application and assess it early. And if
we actually discussed this yesterday in management committee, and you know, my view very strongly is that we want to be flexible here. If I mean, I mean, the process will be as rigorous for certain, but it has to be a pretty good reason. But we're aware of one reason that was a pretty good reason, to be honest, and so we will do what we can to deal with that. I mean, the same would apply if you know, unfortunately something happened. You know, you were very ill, you had a family emergency. We can be flexible in those situations. It happened to me as an interviewer a couple of years ago with a bereavement I had to pull out, and you know, people pull together, and we do what we can. Is it recommended to contact potential supervisors if they cannot be helpful during the application process? They can be helpful if you want to discuss, you know, what your options might be if you come. And I think, you know, those sort of things are good when you get to interview, especially because it shows, you know, that you've thought about it, to be frank, and have ideas. What we are trying to avoid is supervisors commenting on proposals, which, you know, would obviously be unfair on those who didn't have access to that. So, you know, I would always recommend contacting. The more information you get, the better, but it's certainly not required. So I think you may need to assess yourself, you know, how helpful it is, but my advice would be still to do that. Social science, political ecology, background masters, would you still be a good candidate? So this came up on the political sort of policy economics side when we had an applications workshop last March for students, and I mean, what I would say is we are a science DTP, so I think, you know, you need to be predominantly you know, a science background, and you need to be prepared to handle the courses and frankly the, you know, the disciplines that are going to come being within a science-based DTP. That said, you know, some of our projects frankly require very different skills to the more mathematical projects, say in numerical climate modeling, computational climate modeling. So we do have students from a very wide range of backgrounds, very wide range of mathematical backgrounds too. And I certainly think it, you know, it's a difficult one to answer without seeing the details, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out. But I think the main thing, maybe best way to answer is to say, would you be comfortable in the program doing a PhD in this area? And if you are, then yes, it's probably fine, to be frank. Only a potential. You certainly don't need previous experience in research. It's helpful, but not necessarily expected, or not expected. I think most of the other questions, I can't really answer the full-time, part-time one, Victoria, beyond what you've said, I think I've covered most of the other questions. Right, should we contact, you don't need to contact academics to be reviewers. Well, this is a good question. We need to think about this. Should we mention our ideal supervisor as a reviewer? You asked to mention your ideal supervisor, and in general, we do not ask them to review.
No, we don't. The potential supervisors. So the reviewer, I'll just clarify, is one of the assessors. So applications are assessed by 3 different academics. So where we ask for a reviewer, perhaps we should change that word to assessor, because they will be the departmental assessor for your application. So they cannot be your potential supervisor, because that's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, and no need to contact them, I should say, either.
No.
And if you're not sure, it doesn't matter. You know, we will find someone. Does having a preprint article increase chances of success? Is that, yeah, that's a new question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like all of these things. It doesn't do any harm, but it's not expected. And I can't stress enough, we take students who don't have papers too. So I want to answer it in that way to make clear that, you know, you do not have to be, you know, I've seen in the past, you know, candidates apply with 60 or 70 publications to, this was extreme, I must say, to one of the physics programs. And, you know, my reaction was, why on earth are they doing a PhD? Because they're already an established research scientist. And, you know, there are other ways to get a PhD in that situation. Self-sponsorship, we don't take self-funded students. Many programs do, but we don't. There are reasons for that we could discuss, but I'm afraid not, is the answer. I'm going to leave the application ones about English to you, Victoria, later.
Oh, I'll work my way through these.
Yeah.
Was that the English language requirement?
Yes.
So yeah, we have the actual details of what the language requirement are. We have a course page on the main university website. So you go to the main www.ox.ac.uk and hit admissions and then hit graduate. You can type in our course name and our course page will come up, and all the information about the English language requirements are there. So rather than me trying to remember them off the top of my head, I really advise visiting that page. It's very thorough, and it will contain lots of information.
So can reviewers be colleagues of potential supervisors? Look, I mean, in a way, we're all colleagues of each other in Oxford. So I think, you know, again, I want to stress, don't over stress or think about this. It really is just to give us an idea of who might be someone who could understand your application, in other words. So broadly in the correct field. It's probably not a good idea if they're a really close collaborator of who you want to work with. But you know, it really is just to help Victoria, who's going to be faced with 200 to 300 applications, and having to find a department reviewer for each of those. They also get reviewed by management committee members too. So it is really a convenience, isn't it? I think for us, Victoria.
Yeah, I think it's just the logistics of it, that the time period of review is so short, and we are anonymizing applications largely manually during this period. So to have to investigate each application and find a reviewer would just make my job completely impossible. So please, please, please do as much as you can to try and identify someone in your area of expertise who would be suitable to be one of the assessors. I will thank you forever.
I mean, English waivers, I'm never quite sure what's allowed. If you've done a degree and taught in English, I'm sure it'd be fine. You'll be fine, but I'll have to let others answer that. Sometimes we don't know the answers to these questions, and then we refer them to another office.
So it's either having done a degree in English of 9 months or more.
Oh, so you don't.
That doesn't have to be within the UK. That
was in Germany. So the answer then is that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the most surprising questions that comes up every single year is, am I an international or UK student? And often it's clear. Often the answer is we have no idea. And sometimes the answer is we think we do know the answer, then to our amazement discover we were wrong. And
There's a fees office actually.
yeah, we go to them all the time to ask for
Yeah, they will. So every year we have a number of students that come through and they have query next to their name because we're not sure if they're home or international. And it's only after offer that the fees office will investigate that and pin it down.
Don't worry about it. And often we query them, not just thinking there's a 10% chance we might get away with badging you as home. And then to our amazement, it comes back saying yes. So we end up getting another international student funded. So, you know, that's basically the only context for this is we play the game once we've got our list of who we want to make offers to try and maximize our admissions. Background in economics with a strong focus in mathematical. Oh, sorry, it's just scrolled. I've lost it now. Strong focus in mathematical analysis, work experience. Am I eligible? Look, the maths is certainly going to help you hugely. I think you need to tell us why you've got the skills that are relevant for what you want to do. That's what I say to everyone always. What skills do you bring that are relevant to your proposed area of study? And if you can make the case, then you have a great chance of coming in. I mean, I'll also mention, I need to be careful because you can never say too much about, you know, what other people, specific individuals. But we did have a student, you know, not so long ago who is in the program, who came from an arts humanities background and had basically self-taught the sciences. And, you know, we were blown away by that. I mean, you know, it's just amazing. So yeah, these more interesting backgrounds, you know, can be, you know, often, you know, can be very impressive if someone can make the case as to why they've got the right skill set. You can definitely mention in your personal statement your ideal research aspirations. You're asked anyway, I think, to put down, you know, who you might want to work with, which we do mainly just to manage expectations. So if everyone wants to work with the same person, then we know at interview to ask that. I'll wait for the follow-up to come. Will it affect your chances if a supervisor is listed by multiple other applicants? So this happens, actually, to be honest, it always happens with one supervisor every year. And it's usually not the same person each year. It's kind of bizarre how it happens each year. What we do in that situation is if we had 3 or 4 candidates, say, on an interview panel who all want to work with Dr. X, we ask the panel, is actually in our guidance to panels, that they should ask those candidates, would you be open to working with someone else? I would encourage you to actually be quite broad about that. But, you know, if the honest answer is you only want to work with that person, otherwise you're not interested, then you might as well say that, because there's no point sort of, you know, coming on false pretenses here. Although I think most people in practice are quite flexible, and when they see the other opportunities are open to other options. So I would just say, just tell us, you know, that's the case. And what we want to do is make sure that you don't get accepted to the program thinking you're going to work with that person, only then to discover that you can't because there are others. So that's why this is relevant. We try and manage that situation at interview stage and offer stage. I'm not aware of it having affected chances to this point, but well, maybe unless you are really, really adamant you want to work with one person and someone else is too. But I think it's rare, to be honest. If we are not in the socioeconomic expected, Victoria, you'll have to answer this one about contextual statement if it's not applicable.
No, I think you would only complete the contextual statement if there was some background information that would help us in determining that we should give extra points to you because of, you know, you've had challenges or whatever. And I'm going
Yeah, I'm going to stop now, but the final question was, where do you suggest potential reviewers on the form? Will you address that when you do applications?
I think there should be instructions, but basically, can you stick them at the top? Basic. So put your personal statement, and then suggested reviewers 1, 2, 3, and then your personal statement underneath.
Okay. It's 11:01, so we've gone over.